and I'll be serving both as the president of the society tonight and also as sort of the stand-in for the chairman of the board. Let me explain that, even though I know every single person here came to hear Doug Adams, we're going to have to wait for a little while for that. I hope that we'll be finished our business in 10 or 15 minutes. The background of this was that we always have our annual membership meetings in June and usually have a pretty good time at it. The board, for various reasons, decided to change our fiscal year. So now, for the terms of our record keeping, our year starts the same time that our season starts, which is September. And we thought that was fine until our lawyer said, well, look, you know, if you have your fiscal year in September, you have to have your annual meeting within a few months of that. So now all of a sudden we have to fit an annual meeting in. And if you don't mind, I would like to do that. The order of business is set forth in this program, and we'll go through it as quickly as we can. Our chair, John Ryan, is not able to join us, and he has asked me if I can convene the meeting. So, Madam Secretary, could you please confirm the existence of a quorum?
I don't think I need a mic, but we do have a quorum, so thank you very much for attending. Thank you.
Thank you. A quorum consists of 10% of our membership, and we exceed that between the people who are here and the people who have sent proxies and stuff. The next order of business is to nominate and elect the board of directors. The nominating committee has suggested that people who are currently serving on the board continue to do so. Their names are here on your program. All of these people are willing to continue to serve. Are there any nominations of individuals to serve on the board other than those who have been suggested by the nominating committee? In the absence of that, may I have a motion to approve these individuals as directors?
Can we do it ourselves? No.
Yeah, so moved.
So moved.
Yeah, great. Do we have a second? All right. Then all those in favor of the election, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Moving right along, the registrar's report. The statute requires that we report to the members what our current membership is and how it differs from last year. And we have passed out a report that includes on the last page a report of our registrar that notes that our membership is pretty stable. There are about 7% drop in our membership between this date last year and this date this year. Are there any questions or discussions with respect to the registrar's report of our membership?
Is that all recorded in the annual report?
I'm sorry?
Is it all recorded in the annual report?
Everyone has received an annual report.
Is the registrar's report?
Yeah, the registrar's report in the annual report is not the one to which I'm referring. It's the last page of the, Mark, show it, that stapled thing that starts off with the financial, has on the back of it the report of the registrar. All right. Now, the financial report. The legislature has required that we report to the members on certain aspects of our financial condition and compare them to this time last year, and I've asked our treasurer, Mark Villamar, to make that report. Mark, would you please?
Thank you, Peter. Good evening, everyone. The financial reports are generally in the order of a balance sheet and then a statement of results of our activities. In the commercial enterprise, that would be called a profit and loss, but we're not in the business to make a profit, and we hope we don't make a loss. So we try to budget ourselves to an even zero income and expense. So your first report is the balance sheet. It is a relatively straightforward document. The primary assets of our society are the endowment funds. They constitute practically the entire amount of our assets. We don't have any liabilities to speak of. Occasionally we will advance funds for Bayreuth tickets and then eventually work them off when people pay for their tickets. But as of October 31st, we did not have any Bayreuth tickets for the next year. The remaining part of the balance sheet are the fund balances, which show the restricted funds, which are essentially the endowment funds that people have established for the benefit of providing grants to singers. The three funds are the Laut Fund, the Springer Fund, and the Kit Gill Fund. The funds are generally invested now in a combination of equities and debt instruments, and they're yielding a nice amount. If you're in the stock market, you know last year hasn't been a bad year. We'll get to that in a moment. Anyone interested in setting up a fund, do see me after the meeting. I'll be happy to give you instructions. The next report is the results of activities, as I mentioned earlier. That's a more detailed report because there are more details to report. The principal source of our revenue is unquestionably over 60%. It's from membership dues. That's where we get the bulk of our revenue. We get about 14% from our society activities, the seminar, the recital, and the events like this that people will pay some funds for occasionally. Donations constitute about 7.5% of our revenue in 2014. And earnings on our deposits, which are much higher this year than last year, we switched from having all of our investments in fully insured instruments to having investments in, as I said, equities and debt instruments that are not insured. That constituted 17% of our annual revenue. And finally, there's a small amount that constitutes the 100%. Our expenses are chiefly our operational, general administrative expenses, such as committee meetings like this that we have to pay a fee for. Website for this year was particularly high because we had a major revamping of our website, and if you've gone to our website this year as opposed to the previous year, you'll see how much improved it is. So that was a one-time charge, and we won't see that again next year. The next largest expense in 2024 were the costs of producing and distributing the Wagner notes, the essential document that informs all of our members of activities throughout the world relating to Richard Wagner and his operas. That is generally the most expensive part of our operations year after year. I should point out that there are no employees of the society. None of the officers are paid. None of the staff that you see checking you in as you came in or distributing treats afterwards are paid. This is all a volunteer organization, and I'm sure we would welcome any more volunteers that people might want to donate their services for. We also distributed 11% of our revenue to singers. So we had a total of $15,000 distributed to singers in 2024. And another, for the cost of the seminar, recitals, and these events like today, that constituted 26% of our expenses. And that's essentially the financial statements, and if anybody has a question, I'll be happy to address it. And if you think of it later, we're happy to address it later. I want to also just mention briefly the process that the financing side of the society operates. I'm the treasurer. I chair the finance committee. You know there are a number of committees. There's a program committee that does the work that produces events like today. There's a singers committee. There's a Bayreuth committee. There's a governance committee and some others. But The Finance Committee is composed of a number of people who are financially oriented, including 2 former treasurers at this point. And we meet twice a year. We generate a budget in coordination with the other committees to develop the tools necessary to be financially responsible. We also, my books and records are examined once a year by a member of the committee to ensure that I am complying with all the appropriate rules and regulations concerning the society. And that report is given to the Finance Committee for its review, and then the board further reviews the report of the, I'll call it an audit, that's not really done by a CPA firm or anything, but it's a review of my books and records, and that's done each year as well. And that's how the society's financial side works, and so far, I think it works pretty well. Again, if they have any questions now, I'll entertain them. If not, I'll turn it back to Mr. President.
Thank you, Mark. The treasurer has somewhat understated the hundreds of hours that he puts in, that Jillian Murray puts in on the website and on membership communications. And if we're not for people like that, I don't think we'd be where we are. You'll see, if you look at the bottom line of those statements, that our income and expense are both substantially higher this past year than they were before, and they're going to be higher still. We're growing, we're doing well, we're feeling good, and that's what I get out of reviewing Mark's statement. Unless there are any other questions from the floor, I'd like to close it up and actually do what we were here to do. Is everybody okay?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right, I think that the way to start this is to try to get us on some shared minimal floor of knowledge. If you're like me, you know a lot more about Wagner than you know about either Tolkien or film generally, or Jackson or Shore or any of those people. And I would like to just remind some of you and inform others of what it is we'll be talking about when we talk about Shore's score for Lord of the Rings. The music for Lord of the Rings was composed, orchestrated, conducted, and produced by Howard Shore during the 4 years between 2000 and 2004 to support Peter Jackson's film trilogy based on J.R.R. Tolkien's fantasy novel of the same name. It is notable in terms of the length of the score, the size of the staged forces, the unusual instrumentation in the score, the featured soloists, the multitude of musical styles, and the number of recurring musical motifs that are used. Shore wrote many hours of music for the trilogy, effectively scoring the film for its entire length. Over 13 hours of music, including various alternate takes, have been released across the various formats. Shore intended the score to be operatic and to have a sense of age. He made use of an immense ensemble, including a large symphony orchestra, which was principally but not solely the London Philharmonic, multiple instrumental bands, various choirs, and vocal and instrumental soloists requiring an ensemble ranging between 230 and 400 performing musicians. The series' music became the most successful of Shore's career. It earned 3 Oscars, 2 Golden Globes, 3 Grammys, and other nominations and awards. Some of his themes or leitmotifs, such as the Shire theme, became individually popular. The music has attracted the interest of musicologists as well as Tolkien scholars. It is performed by choirs and orchestras around the world as symphony pieces, concert suites, and live projection concerts. Shore invited the musicologist Doug Adams our guest tonight, to observe the composition process and to document it in what eventually became a book released in 2010 entitled Music of the Lord of the Ring Films. It identifies many of the themes of the score and describes how they are used in each of the scenes of the film trilogy. The music for the film series was voted the best soundtrack of all time by a Classic FM listener poll for 6 years in a row. So would you join me in welcoming Doug Adams?
As I set up my gear here, as you explain, I am going off of a script this evening. A few years ago, I was presenting an event in San Francisco, and they asked me to please appear on the Sunday morning news program out there, which I happily said, sure, but who will I be speaking to? What do they want to hear about? And said, oh, don't worry, we have somebody that knows quite a bit about music. It'll be a wonderful experience. So I showed up very early and had my makeup done, as you do when you're on morning television, and found out that I was being interviewed by this sports guy, who then proceeded to announce to the greater San Francisco area that I had recently collaborated with Richard Wagner. So I now leave nothing to chance. I will be going off of a script. Doug Adams. I'm a musician from Chicago and I'm extremely happy to be here with you all this evening. That said, I do feel I likely need to justify my presence a bit. Back in the 1990s, when I was in music school, I became aware of a magazine dedicated to the unique and often underappreciated art of film music. As a kid in the 80s, I'd cut my musical teeth on film music, and in college, while I was studying my Bach and Beethoven, I was simultaneously learning all I could about John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith. Therefore, I reached out to this film music magazine and asked if I could perhaps interview some composers for them. The editors weren't musically trained per se, so they thought that having an actual musician on staff, or at least a music student, would be helpful, so I got the job. Fast forward a few years, and I'd become the magazine's go-to writer for composer interviews. Composers would contact their publicists and would ask to speak to me specifically, if for no other reason than I spoke their language and it made their lives easier. And so it was that I received a request to interview Howard Shore. I was familiar with his work, in fact I was a fan. His scores for the films of David Cronenberg were legendary, and at the time he was branching out aggressively, bringing his unique voice to all sorts of different genres. Within the span of just a handful of years, he scored the body horror of The Fly, the 1980s whimsy of Tom Hanks' Big, the Shakespearean texts of Looking for Richard, and the manic comedy of Robin Williams' Mrs. Doubtfire. Howard, for those of you unfamiliar, got his start here in New York. He was the original band leader on Saturday Night Live, and he was on the show, sometimes in funny costumes, for 5 seasons. Howard, like most of the SNL crew, had come from Toronto, and that maybe was the key to our relationship. Howard was Canadian, I was from Chicago, the Midwest. We got along marvelously, possibly because we were both obsessed with politely apologizing to one another during our interviews. I'm sorry I'd forgotten The Fly came out in 1986, not 1985, I'd say. I'm sorry I called you back late. I was on the phone with Al Pacino, he'd say. His apologies were more impressive than mine. We also had a deep artistic connection. I interviewed him numerous times, and we'd always wrap up by talking about what we'd seen or what we'd heard recently. I was in grad school now and living at home. He'd call and get my parents on the phone, which was unnerving to say the least. After one interview, Howard seemed especially anxious to chat. He just signed on for a new project, The Lord of the Rings. He asked if I'd heard. I apologized again. Yes, of course, I was trying not to mention it in case you didn't want to get into it yet. I was at least partially right. It was early on, and he couldn't yet say much. However, he asked me a question I'd never expected. Do you want to be involved? My affirmative response began the journey that dominated the next 15 years of my life as I covered, analyzed, presented, and endlessly discussed Howard Shore's music to The Lord of the Rings. I visited his offices, studied his score while the ink was still wet. I attended the recording sessions with the London Philharmonic. I met the filmmakers. I even had dinner with a hobbit or two. More than anything, it was the music itself that held my attention. There was a massive amount of it, 12 plus hours, and it was packed with leitmotifs, which Howard used to illustrate the story, provide narrative clarity, and dig into the texts and subtexts that a big Hollywood film couldn't very well pause to discuss. Someplace around the second of the 3 scores, Howard and I began to discuss opera. He was an opera buff, though his interest tended toward the Italian composers, but we both knew our Wagner, and we both knew we weren't the first to see parallels between Wagner and Tolkien. Tolkien himself brushed the comparison aside. Both rings were round, and there the resemblance ceased. Howard, on the other hand, was happy to embrace it. He didn't write like Wagner, which is to say he grew up in an era of Hindemith and Sibelius. He'd studied jazz harmony along classical counterpoint. He'd written hours and hours of original film music over decades of work. His musical fingerprints were already established, and he sounded different. But what he saw in Wagner was structure, ingenious narrative tools that could tell this sort of story better than any other approach. I'm extremely fortunate tonight that this room is full of people who are familiar with Wagner and with his genius. You know his themes, you know his stories. So instead of recapping any of that, I thought I would tell you the story of The Lord of the Rings, but through Howard Shore's music. This is what it sounds like when a different composer takes on a ring myth, a composer informed by Wagner's greatness, but not inclined to copy his style. I don't do this for competitive purposes. I find competition and list-making of the arts to be rather useless, I must say. Instead, I think we will all be struck by the number of Wagnerian choices Howard made when composing his ring. As I say, there are 12 hours of this music, and another 12 that tell the story of The Hobbit, so I apologize in advance for my condensing and my omissions. Participation in The Lord of the Rings resulted in a 400-plus page book about Howard's music. So if you're inclined, you can find the full account of the score's creation, its over 90 leitmotifs, its choral texts, and its debt to Wagner there. I'm hoping here that we all have at least a little familiarity with the Lord of the Rings plot. Unsurprisingly, it comes with a large number of places, objects, and characters. I'll do my best to keep everything straight for you, but if it's tricky telling Sauron apart from Saruman, or remembering which kingless realm helps the other, I completely understand. Howard Shore's music for The Lord of the Rings is as eclectic and diverse as the world of Middle-earth. What you heard before my introduction was music from the film's prologue, a sort of backstory that sets up the One Ring, an all-powerful creation of Sauron, and the races of Tolkien's Middle-earth, dwarves, elves, hobbits, and men. Like Wagner, Tolkien drew heavily on Germanic myth, with some tinges of Scandinavian and Anglo-Saxon as well. Unlike Wagner, Shore has a lot of action to hit, so there's no extended E-flat major introduction, which isn't better or worse, it's just an easy illustration of the differences between opera and film scores. Film music always has less time to dwell on individual moments. It's always slaved to the picture. Its architecture is preordained. Of course, Wagner once famously had to extend one of his own passages in order to accommodate some set movement. In truth, Wagner likely would have made a fine film composer. John Williams has joked that Wagner would have been the first composer to rise to the ranks of a studio head. The famous WB on the Warner Brothers water tower would simply have read W. Anyway, Shore begins his prologue with the chorus singing in Sindarin, one of the languages Tolkien devised for the elves. Who enters here, it says, who brings us this token of doom? This is one of several token languages used for the choral texts in scores. Before he became an author of myths, Tolkien was a philologist, a professor of languages. And it shows. With very few exceptions, Shore's choral music is in the languages that Tolkien invented to tell his story. It was a way to return that element to the films. After the intro, the story moves to modern day, or the third age of Middle-earth, and introduces us to the Shire, a lush green land of natural simplicity, and home to a race of halflings known as hobbits. The music of the Shire draws from the tradition of Celtic folk music, complete with fiddle, whistle, bodhrán, and guitar, in order to depict a lush, complacent countryside. Shore's theme for the Shire uses a simple 5-tone scale as its basis, and is full of leisurely pauses that disrupt the flow of daily life, only to find it resuming right where it left off. The Shire is the hobbit's cozy corner of the world, far away from the looming dangers of Middle-earth. The One Ring is discovered along the Gladden River by a small, greedy creature that will come to be known as Gollum. In Howard Shore's music, Gollum is represented by a piteous motif that embodies his slavish devotion to the ring. The theme often features the cor anglais, which twists up and down, outlining an alternating pair of minor chords. Tolkien's ring, like Wagner's, initiates great change in those who possess it. Ulrich, already a spiteful dwarf, becomes violently mad with power. After claiming the ring from Gollum, a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins suffers the One Ring's infectious greed and distrust, for in the ring resides the power of Sauron, an ancient spirit bent upon world domination. Tolkien's ring actively seeks its master by corrupting all who wear it. Howard Shore's primary theme for the ring begins with a pinched, dissonant harmony, then circles downward, settling into a chain of beautiful but anguishing minor chords. There's even a bitonal hint to the opening, A minor over F minor, to suggest a sort of duplicity. The melodic line breathes in and out, sighing life and purpose into the ring's character. At the same time, there's a sadness to this theme, as if it speaks to the suffering the ring inevitably brings to each of its owners. This theme plays whenever the One Ring changes hands. Thus, it is heard when Bilbo, after much consternation, abandons his magic ring and leaves it to his favorite nephew, Frodo Baggins. Rumors of Frodo's ring cross Middle-earth. Saruman the White, once a wise, noble wizard, is overcome by his lust for power and breeds an army of orcs in order to overthrow Middle-earth and claim the ring. Shore depicts Saruman's furnaces and his army of orcs with clanging metal percussion, including anvils, bell plates, and chains struck against piano wires. However, where Wagner uses taut triplet rhythms to represent the mechanical hammering of the dwarves' forge, Shore uses an asymmetrical 5-beat pattern. This lopsided gait, coupled with the metal percussion, represents the industrial might of Middle-earth and an affront to nature. Tolkien's ring leaves the Shire. Frodo, accompanied by his hobbit friends Sam, Merry, and Pippin, journeys to Rivendell, the home of the elves. But before they can reach that land, they are accosted by 9 riders, not women warriors in this case, but 9 corrupted kings of men, the Black Riders known better as the Ringwraiths. Shore's Ringwraith music is ritualistic and ominous. Its phrases are volleyed in 1-2 punches, a rhythmic device that Wagner likewise employs to represent death. This text is in the Black Speech, another one of Tolkien's languages. Eventually, the ring completes the journey to Rivendell. Tolkien's elves embody Middle-earth's most elegant cultures. They are immortal and forever dedicated to art and wisdom. Shore's music for Rivendell is built upon two arpeggiated figures that drift from strings to woodwinds as they arc through the orchestra. Above this resides a glinting combination of harp, chimes, and female voices. Elves' music is in a considerably different harmonic language than the Hobbit's music, but if you listened closely there was a little bit of the Shire theme following Rivendell. This time, away from the Shire, the theme has become more subdued and orchestral. The Celtic instruments have given way to a solo clarinet, which has become a new signature sound. The Hobbits are maturing. Rivendell is also home to Arwen, an elf maiden who loves Aragorn, a human man. He is also the heir to the great kingdom of Gondor. Arwen worries that an immortal elf and a mortal man could never be together. Again, the Wagner parallel is very strong. Eventually, Arwen decides to forsake her love for Aragorn and depart Middle-earth with the elves. But she has a vision of her future with Aragorn and the son that she would bear, and she turns back. Here a solo soprano sings in Elvish, "I saw a star fade in the evening sky. The dark was too deep, and so light faded, softly pining." ears were not deceiving you as the Lord of the Rings music became more an operatic creation. Yes, that was Renee Fleming who was brought in to add her voice to the score's increasing scope. You also heard there the Rivendell arpeggios darkening beneath her theme, changing to minor harmonies and heavier orchestrations. There are other worldly matters at hand. Elrond, the master of Rivendell, has summoned a council comprising the different races of Middle-earth, elves, dwarves, men, and some uninvited hobbits. It is decided that the ring must be destroyed, and the council forms the Fellowship of the Ring, a 9-member company that will seek to carry the One Ring to Mordor and undo it in the fires of Mount Doom. The Fellowship's theme is heroic and determined. While the melodic line is based on a minor scale, the harmonization is entirely major, the embodiment of both darkness and light. Led by a strong brass statement of the Hobbit's Shire theme, the Fellowship theme steps boldly into the score. Like Wagner, as Shore's collection of themes becomes denser, he allows material to weave together, often in adversarial ways. The orc's 5-beat pattern, all that metal percussion we heard before, is particularly prone to this sort of treatment. It's constantly infecting other themes with its lopsided gait. Here in a passage from The Two Towers, it attacks and distends the heroic fellowship theme. Heading this new fellowship is Gandalf the Grey, a wandering wizard who has befriended the hobbits. Gandalf, however, believes that Middle-earth's future is in the hands of mankind. The 9-member fellowship includes 2 such men, the aforementioned Aragorn and Boromir. Boromir, like Siegfried, is a tragic hero. During Elrond's council, Boromir speaks of Gondor, the great kingdom of men. And, like Siegfried, Gondor's theme has a connection to solo French horn. Shore's theme proudly leaps a perfect fifth, but the accompaniment does not rise to embrace it, and the melody proceeds plaintively and cautiously. Gondor is without a king, and it has fallen upon hard times. to these concerts live with the music, the film live with the music. That's the passage that always terrifies the horn player. They never want to play that solo at the beginning. The Fellowship leaves Rivendell and journeys eastward, where its resolve is tested in Moria, the long-abandoned underground home of the dwarves. Though Tolkien's dwarves, like Wagner's, are occasionally afflicted by materialism and greed, they are gruff, not evil. Moria, however, is no longer home to the dwarves, and in their absence, it has been overrun. Shore's music for the dwarves is everything the elves is not. It is full of incomplete harmonies, sharp-cornered phrases, rhythmic propulsion, and the sounds of deep male voices, singing and grunting in the dwarves' language of Khuz'dul. As the danger mounts, the Fellowship theme charges ahead bravely, but it is chased by the orcs' 5-beat pattern, as well as the music of fouler creatures. Soon the dwarves' music crumbles in overlapping, shifting plates of dissonance as the Fellowship attempts to escape the long dark of Moria. I should point out here, this is the one passage of the 3 scores that was not recorded in England. This was recorded with the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. And the chorus, of course, is a male chorus, but the grunting is a rugby team. Brought them in to do some extra bass sounds with the grunting there. Gandalf the Grey in Moria faces the Balrog, a demon of the ancient world, and falls, leaving the Fellowship rudderless and despondent. Soon the hobbits are separated from the group, and Boromir is struck dead by Saruman's orcs. The Fellowship is broken and desperately in need of allies. As Gandalf prophesied, here the world of men becomes crucially important. Rohan, like Gondor, is a troubled kingdom. Its ruler, King Theoden, has lost his mind to Saruman, and now answers to his malicious influence. But Gandalf the Grey is sent back to Middle-earth, now as Gandalf the White, and he leads the remnants of the broken Fellowship to Rohan. There, in Theoden's throne room, Saruman is exorcised, and Rohan reclaims a measure of its former glory. Shore's theme for Rohan features strong minor modes with a distinct Norwegian flavor. The dark brass is momentarily interrupted by a fiddle solo that was composed for a hardanger, a Norwegian fiddle with a husky tone. Though Rohan's power is reawakening, the fiddle represents the fragility that still lies within. provide the Fellowship with a powerful ally, but they are not enough. Sauron's power continues to grow, and Saruman's army of orcs now counts in the tens of thousands. If Middle-earth is to survive, then nature itself must act. Neither Tolkien nor Wagner treats nature as an impartial observer. Rather, it is both sentient and eventually an active participant in the story. Like Wagner, Howard Shore's motif for nature first appears in the score as a gentle figure. This leitmotif is full of diminished, minor, and major harmonies that flow endlessly into one another. This irresolution hints neither at defeat nor suffering, but instead at an untapped, near limitless reserve of power. In the shadow of World War I, Tolkien saw industrialization as a front to the natural world. The metal and wheels of Saruman's burning forges and the orcs' spiked armor and sharp weapons represented these atrocities in Middle-earth. The metal percussion in Shore's asymmetrical 5V pattern is derived from this industrial tone. In order to repair Saruman's damage to the land, nature takes action. Shore's nature theme swirls, climbs, and expands seemingly without end. Powerful mixed chorus dominates the writing, washing all traces of the metal percussion from the score, as Saruman's forges are attacked by the tree-like Ents, guardians of the forest and agents of nature. This was an idea that Tolkien knowingly cribbed from Shakespeare. When the forest comes to Dunsinane and Macbeth, Tolkien wished it had been the actual trees themselves, not disguised men. So in The Lord of the Rings, it is the trees themselves that march. The Ents wash away Saruman's evil. Sauron, author of the Ring, bands together all remaining orcs in Middle-earth and sets them against Gondor in an attempt to wipe out mankind. Gondor cannot withstand the coming assault, so they send for aid by lighting the beacon fires across the plains in order to contact Rohan. One after another, as the beacons are lit, Gondor's theme reaches out, seeking salvation. But the question remains, will Rohan answer the call? Gondor's call reaches King Theoden, and he consents. Rohan will answer. Rohan once again has its strong king, but Gondor does not. Aragorn is destined to lead, but he is reluctant. In another Wagnerian move, the secret is held in a sword. Siegfried has Nothung, Aragorn has Anduril. In The Lord of the Rings, Aragorn's forefathers held Narsil, the sword of the king, but Sauron shattered it. Elrond commands Rivendell's elvish smiths to reforge the sword, which is renamed Anduril. Here the arpeggios of Rivendell give way to Gondor's secondary theme in the Lydian mode, which represents the glory of both Aragorn's newly forged sword and his acceptance of his rightful place in Gondor's history. Happened to be sitting in the recording booth next to the director, Peter Jackson, the day that was recorded. And if you ever wonder what a director contributes to a score in terms of musical content, the only request was, I think the cymbals are too loud. So that was the directorial contribution to that composition. While the army of men holds Gondor's borders, Frodo brings the ring to Mount Doom. As the Hobbit stands above the fires, Shore reinforces the theme for the One Ring's history with motifs for its evil and its seduction. The ensuing music is one part canon and one part dissonant counterpoint, both of which pull at the edges of Frodo's frayed mind. Via Renee Fleming, Sauron's creation exerts every ounce of its horrid influence, in order to convince the hobbit to turn his back, abandon his quest, and claim the ring as his own. Two-chord leitmotif for Mount Doom erupts in the brass, the same two chords that previously represented Gollum and his dark obsession. Low strings churn through rumbling figures that recall Gollum's cor anglais melody, and soon enough, Gollum himself emerges from the shadows, leaps onto Frodo's back, and steals back the ring. Gollum triumphantly holds the ring aloft, but he stumbles from the ledge and plunges into the fires below. Shore introduces the magnificent destruction motif, and the One Ring is undone. Sauron's dominion falls. Aragorn is crowned King of Gondor, and the Fellowship parts. For his role in the War of the Ring, Frodo is granted passage to the Undying Lands, the elves' eternal land far beyond the sea. As Middle-earth enters its peaceful Fourth Age, Shore introduces an homage to Wagner's Götterdämmerung. The Days of the Ring floats airily through E major arpeggios as Tolkien's world turns the page and Middle-earth is once again born anew. an interesting finale to Shore's Ring scores, for in it he finally acknowledges the Wagner influence. However, it's a bit puzzling, isn't it? Gorgeous as it is, that music doesn't sound anything like Götterdämmerung. If anything, perhaps it was closer to Rheingold's opening? I must admit, I never got a straight answer out of Howard, or even a Canadian apology. In the end, I think maybe it was his way of tipping his hat to Wagner, but also saying, both rings are round, but don't overthink it. Personally, I'm glad to have both works to compare, to contrast, and to move me. Magic rings are not to be taken lightly, but I believe there is room in this world for more than one. I hope you agree. Thank you.
Doug, we thank you very much for schlepping all the way over from Chicago to share your expertise. Before we have some wine and good stuff to eat outside, and before we go there, I just want to follow up on one observation that you made very early in your remarks. You said that there's a difference between film and stage with respect to music, because in film the music needs to defer to or to support the picture?
In most cases, yes.
Why isn't that the same for a play? I mean, what's the distinction between a story told on film and a story told on stage, such that suddenly the music has to recede?
In my opinion, my unproven opinion, I think it has very much to do, or at the very least is related to the difference between stage acting and screen acting. Stage acting tends to be a physically distanced thing and requires sometimes a broader physicality to convey it to the entire audience. Screen acting can happen in very minute movements and in very minute segments because it's edited together. We're never really seeing the true performance. We're seeing a few frames of this take and this take and this take, possibly rearranged by a generous editor. And I think that physical intimacy possibly changes what the music needs to address. If I have a fight scene at the end of Macbeth, chances are I'm doing it on stage, I will score the ambience. I will give you something that's Scottish, I'll give you something that's misty, something that's kingly. If I'm doing it in a film, you're going to get a brass stab every time someone throws a punch or swings a sword. Now, these are broad generalizations, and I'm speaking more of an American approach to film music. A European approach might go more for the ambiance. Ennio Morricone, if you don't know his name, you probably know his work. He did all the spaghetti westerns with the Sergio Leone. You can enjoy my beautiful singing. I'm glad I'm singing for a group of opera fans. But he would very often score the ambiance rather than the physical action of the screen. The American approach is very much about the physical action. And I think it has very much to do with what we see. If I see a film scene, I could be intimately close to the performer. Theater depends on where your seats are.
Yeah.
So I think that might be part of it. Yeah.
Thank you again. I hope you will join us outside and we'll continue our conversation.
My pleasure.
Thank you
Thank you,
again.
everybody. Thank you. Thank you. In the spirit of the Shire, I hear there's wine and cheese. So.
Yeah, there's
Second breakfast.
Yes, right.